Free Minds TV is brought to you in part by anarchyinyourhead.com, a comic about freedom. When it comes to politics, they hate just about everyone, so they're bound to make fun of someone that you don't like eventually. Anarchyinyourhead.com, that's anarchyinyourhead.com. Tonight on Free Minds TV, as California declares fiscal emergency, the federal government is poised to set even more government bailouts and lower interest rates as low as 0%. We're also going to be getting into the terrorist attacks in Mumbai and the Downsizer dispatch, all that and much more tonight on Free Minds TV. And welcome to Free Minds TV, where we challenge you, the viewer, to think outside the box. With you, as always, is Toby, and off to my side is Nick. As you can see, Lauren, our director, is still in jail behind bars, but we're still getting through it. This is week 3 without Lauren, our director, and we're still making some shows. So even though hey, there we are, we're both here. So she is behind bars. Hopefully she'll be out again next week, but we're not really sure. Last time she went to jail because of processing, they let her out 2 days late. So if all goes well and they let her out on time, she'll be back with us in the booth next week. But if they hold her like they did last time she was in jail, she won't be out for a few days more.
Yeah. So we'll see. But either way, we will be making a new episode next week, and we should have episodes right up through December, despite the holidays. So you won't have to miss any Free Minds TV.
Yeah, there's a whole lot to talk about, and we want to get right into it. Of course, we will be talking with Lauren and getting into more of the story behind her when she's back on the show. And if you want to see some more of the backstory, check out the archives at freemindstv.com. But for now, we must press forward and move on. Nick, tonight you brought an article about some of the terrorist attacks that have been happening. People have probably seen them on the news that are happening in Mumbai. What's going on?
Well, terrorists essentially attacked a number of hotels, cafes, other places in the city of Mumbai, India. Now it looks like the reports are that this was a Kashmiri separatist group, so essentially mostly Pakistani terrorists from a group called Lashkar-e-Taiba. So not Al-Qaeda, although there are some questions about whether or not Al-Qaeda was somehow involved in the attacks, and we'll be fixing the screen in a second. Okay, and so really, I could get into all the details. It's still a little bit uncertain as to who may have been behind this. It looks like there may be a connection between the attacks in Mumbai and Al-Qaeda operatives who planned the bombings in Bali. But that's really inconsequential. I'm sure they'll be figured out by intelligence communities, and it's kind of hard to figure out what's true and what's not in that regard. What I want to focus on is how the attacks could have gone differently. We saw on September 11th, as well as these attacks in Mumbai, that had you had a number of people who were armed, just civilians, not police or military, you would have had people on the scene who could have, to some extent, prevented the attacks. Now, on September 11th, anybody with any kind of a firearm could have probably stopped the hijackings because the terrorists, after all, were only armed with box cutters. So they didn't really have much in the way of weaponry in that case. Now, in these attacks in Mumbai, you had a lot of terrorists. They were armed with machine guns. They were armed with explosives. I mean, you weren't really going to outgun the terrorists. But had you had a few people in the hotel who were armed, which Indian law doesn't really allow very much, you could have at least bought unarmed people some time to get out while you held the terrorists up. So I really think one of the best ways to combat terrorism, and it is a real concern, I mean, these attacks came out of nowhere, essentially. It was an attack where they apparently came in from the sea, so they snuck right in, landed on the beaches, and attacked a city. So it wasn't even like, as happened on September 11th, you had people in the country for a period of time. These people just basically snuck in from the outside and launched an attack, which could happen anywhere, really.
Right, and it doesn't even have to be a terrorist attack. It can. What you're focusing on here is arming the populace, arming the civilians out there, so that they can protect themselves against terrorists or just armed robbers. I think it was the Union Leader I was reading earlier today and looked at an article from St. Louis where the alderman is calling for the populace to take up arms and buy guns to keep in their houses because the police out there just aren't keeping up with the crime rate, and it's up to citizens to really protect themselves. So whether you're talking about preventing terrorist attacks or just protecting your property, your family, your own life, it's important to not count on the government to protect you because they're not very good at it. They have a lot of reactionary laws. They pass plenty of laws after something happens, but actually preventing someone from getting hurt, they're useless. I mean, they don't do anything for that. They're the cleanup crew, if anything.
Right. I mean, they had paramilitary forces here in Mumbai who came in after the fact and had a shootout with the criminals, the terrorists, but they didn't get there in time. They're not, you can't have, no matter how many police and military you have, they're not going to be there all the time to prevent a crime. So when you're walking down the street at night, odds are good that there's no police officer on that particular street looking out for you at that time. So you can have much less of a police state, much less of a military complex if you have an armed citizenry. To some extent, we do have that in the U.S. Unfortunately, a lot of the places where you need self-protection, you need a firearm to defend yourself the most, are inner cities, places like Washington, D.C., New York City, Los Angeles, places with strict gun laws also happen to have really high rates of crime. That's where...
Why could that be? Could it be because the criminals are the ones with guns and you outlawed all those good citizens who actually follow the law? They don't have any guns, so they can't defend themselves. The people who don't care about breaking the laws, the same people who are murdering people, raping people, breaking into people's houses, you think they're going to care about a gun law? No, you're going to be taking guns away from the law-abiding citizens, and then the criminals and the police are the only ones with guns, and the citizenry left in the middle with no way to protect themselves.
Yeah, and we've seen, I know Florida allowed concealed carry when they relaxed their laws to make it easier for people to obtain a permit to carry a handgun. They saw their violent crime rate drop dramatically. I want to say it was in the 20 or 30% range for violent crime. It's a significant reduction, and the evidence is out there that when you do allow law-abiding citizens to have access to firearms and to carry them for self-defense, crime rates drop because it's an effective deterrent. Not everybody's going to have a gun, but if you're a criminal and you know maybe 1 in 10 people carries a gun in that particular state or is licensed to do so, the odds are pretty good that if you're trying to make a career out of robbing people, it's not going to last too long before you end up getting shot.
Right, and this may or may not work as a deterrent for terrorist attacks as well. I mean, if terrorists are thinking that they're going to get killed themselves after only maybe killing 1 or 2 people, maybe they'll think twice about attacking that particular place. And the more people with guns, the fewer places the terrorists have to attack. That's a good thing in my book.
Yeah, I mean, the fact is if you're a suicide terrorist, you're not going to be deterred by the idea that you might die, which a lot of the terrorism that people are concerned about now is suicide terrorism. But they don't want to get killed before they get to blow up a bomb or take out a number of people. And you can make what are now soft targets, railway stations, right, hotels, you can make them hard targets, so they have less places where they can attack civilians.
How many murders or thefts are there at a gun show? Are there a lot of them, Nick? Because, I mean, with all the guns, I listen to these anti-gun advocates out there, and you'd think when you go to a gun show that there's people getting shot, murdered, people getting robbed everywhere. Does that happen at a gun show? I personally haven't ever been to one.
I've been to gun shows, and I've never seen any kind of violent crime take place.
Because anyone who decided that they were going to shoot someone would be a fool, and they'd be dead almost instantly.
To be honest, most of the gun shows actually, ironically, make you take your gun off, but I think that's mostly because they just need to know whether you bought that gun there or not, because you can just put one on your hip and then walk out. It's more about preventing some kind of shoplifting or making a switcheroo than about any kind of concern about it.
And if you don't think that people should own guns, I dare you to put a big old sign in your front yard that says this house contains no guns. See who gets robbed next. All right, Nick, we got to get into the Downsizer dispatch because when we come back, we have a whole lot on the economy to talk about. Bailouts, California on the brink of economic collapse with their fiscal government. But first, it's time to focus in on some other stuff, and the Downsizer dispatch is trying to take a little bit of our thought away from the economy, because that's all that seems to be talked about, and focus on some of the huge issues that have almost been forgotten about.
Right, and Downsize DC has been focusing a lot on the economy because that's been the big issue of the day. There's been a lot of activity around bailouts. That's where the government's doing a lot of mischief right now, spending a lot of taxpayer money that they shouldn't be spending. So that's where Downsize DC has been focusing. But they send a message kind of taking a time out and just reminding people that there are other issues that are still out there. And you don't want to forget that things like the Patriot Act are still out there. The Real ID Act, the government is still trying to implement a national ID card. And thankfully, the states have been stepping up and fighting that, but this is no time to stop. You should be getting in touch with your congressman still, even though you might be mostly concerned about the bailouts and other economic matters. Make sure you follow up and let them know that as a constituent, you haven't forgotten about these other issues. Because that's what politicians like. They like to have a crisis, like the economic crisis we're having right now, take the people's eyes off of where they've dropped the ball in other areas. So if all people are looking at is the economy, then the politicians don't have to worry about, covering up where they screwed up with the war or civil liberties. So we don't want to take the pressure off them. And I would encourage people to go to downsizedc.org. If you're not already on the Downsizer email list, sign up for that, and it'll just keep you up to date on different issues. When a new bailout comes out, when something that threatens civil liberties like the Patriot Act comes out, it'll keep you informed about that, and it allows you to contact your representatives and urge them to cut the size of the federal government. I mean, that's what most Americans say they want, and I think that's what we have to do if the country is going to survive beyond the next decade or two. So again, just focus on the Real ID Act. You can also tell your congressman to support Ron Paul's American Freedom Agenda Act, which would repeal a whole bunch of mostly Bush administration infringements on civil liberties, things like FISA enlargement, the Military Commissions Act, and the Patriot Act. It would also restore habeas corpus to people who've been charged with terrorism. They would get a trial, and they'd get to face the charges against them. And you can also visit them and send a message with the I Am Not Afraid campaign, basically telling your representatives that you're not so scared of terrorism that you want to hand over your civil liberties, which is the justification that they've been using to try to get people to hand over their civil liberties, is to keep them scared and essentially get you to hand over your right to, a fair public speedy trial and protections against unreasonable searches and seizures. I mean, very fundamental American rights are being handed over because people are afraid. So just let your representatives know that you're not one of those people.
Well, Nick, the world is a very scary place, but I know for one that I don't trust the government to take care of me in these times, and for economic reasons or to protect me against the boogeyman or terrorism or whatever it is that we should be scared of today.
Usually they make it a lot worse.
Oh, it's always horrible. We're on the brink of collapse, you know that, right? The world's about to end, and that's what we're going to be talking about when we come back. Some of the economy, what the federal government is doing. Is this actually going to help us or hurt us in the long run? We'll be coming back with a whole lot more. Stay tuned. This is Free Minds TV.
This edition of whatever it is you're watching is brought to you by
Ridley Report, Ridley Report, something, 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 Ridley Report. Ridley Report, Ridley Report, something, 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 Ridley Report.
Free Minds TV is brought to you in part by Life Productions for your basic and semi-pro video production needs. From full wedding and event coverage to DVD authoring and distributions, lifeproductions.com. That's lyfproductions.com. Stick in between segments of our show.
Okay, I can do that.
All right.
Hi there, I'm Russell Ganning, and you're watching Free Minds TV.
And welcome back to Free Minds TV. As always, it's Toby here with you.
And Nick.
Log on to our website, freemindstv.com. From there, you have all the archives, ways you can help this show, vote for the show on Podcast Alley. It is the beginning of a new month, and a whole lot more. freemindstv.com. All right, Nick. As we said, it's all that seems to be on the news. It's been on the news for months now. The economy, and this huge government bailout that just seems to be ballooning bigger and bigger. Before we get into what the federal government's doing, I just wanted to point something out that I stumbled across, and it has to do with California on the brink of economic collapse. Now, a lot of people know that California's been in some pretty rough financial shape for a while now. They love government, and so they have a lot of government programs out there, But that costs a lot of money. Their taxation rate is already enormous, and they don't know what to do. I mean, they're taxing the people so much, they can't really tax them anymore, and they're running out of money because they have all these government programs. They've borrowed so much money over the years that their credit is coming due, and it looks like they really have hit a brick wall now. It looks like their federal deficit is supposed to grow to 20.
The federal deficit?
I'm sorry, the state deficit for the fiscal year is going to balloon to $28 billion more over the next 19 months. And in February, they're just not going to be able to pay the bills unless something as drastic is done right now.
Yeah, I mean, and when you consider the fact that California is it's a large state. I mean, as far as an economy goes, I think it's in the top, if it were to be its own country, it's in the top 20 or 30 countries in the world. It's no small state. And if it can happen to a state like California, with millions and millions of people living there, is the U.S. next?
Right. What it makes you wonder is how long until we hit this brick wall. I mean, it's out there. When you spend tons of money that you don't have and borrow trillions of dollars, I mean, for California, I guess they're in the billions, but on the federal level, we're in the trillions and trillions. I think the federal deficit's at what, like 11 trillion now, and it's only going to grow more.
Well, the federal deficit was at 11 trillion, but now if you put the bailout liabilities on there, the liabilities for the bailout are something like $8 trillion now.
They're 8 now? Last week they were only up to 7. Wow. I mean, it seems like every week they bump up another trillion or two of what they're going to be spending. So, I mean, California seems to have found this brick wall. They see that they're going to run out of money by February unless they start seriously cutting spending or tax the people so much that they all move out and they're no longer a state anymore. I think that's what a lot of people are doing, is simply moving out of California, and the real rich people that do live in California technically live somewhere else where they don't have to pay these exorbitant taxes. But I mean, what are they going to do? They need to cut the size of government, and that's exactly what we need to do on the federal level too, because we're driving very quickly and there's a brick wall out there and we're going to hit it unless we stop spending all this money. So do you think the federal government's going to do something about this? Are they actually going to do something to get out of this mess and let it take care of itself? It
seems like they're hitting the gas as we approach the brick wall, which is what unfortunately, governments have tended to do in the past. If you look at Germany or what happened in Russia when the Soviet system was falling apart, they're not very good at scaling back and changing their ways. They've been spending us into oblivion for decades now, and basically all they know how to do is spend money, either print money or raise taxes and spend more. It seems like all they're really good at this point is further damaging the economy.
Well, earlier this week, Fed Chairman Ben Bernanke announced that he may try some even more drastic tactics to try to fix the economy, or simply kick the can down the road a little bit further. He's talking about possibly lowering interest rates to 0%. That means it's free for big banks to borrow money, and that would be a huge influx of cash into the system, which would devalue all of our dollars and raise inflation even more. This is something that it's pretty unorthodox, hasn't really been tried on a large scale like this. I know Japan did it earlier. I think they're the only Western nation with this kind of economy that has lowered their interest rate that low, but I guess we might do that in the next couple of weeks. That's kind of scary.
It is, because first of all, there's no further that they can go. I mean, they can't, it's not like they can
pay you to take out money.
Japan did do something to that effect where you were essentially had a negative interest rate. If you held the loan for so long, you'd actually get money. I think it was some kind of a bond set up, which is crazy. I mean, what you're looking at right now is we're seeing deflation, price deflation, because a lot of loans, a lot of debt out there is being wiped out, because we're seeing banks just essentially either sell their debts for pennies on the dollar, the mortgages that they own, or it's being wiped out. So right now, you're seeing the economic cycle. The market is actually having a constriction in the money supply. But the Federal Reserve is pumping in so much money, and they're cutting interest rates so drastically that as soon as banks start to lend again, they're going to be loaning a lot of federal money. I mean, the money that's being printed is being handed to the banks. And with fractional reserve lending, when you give the banks $1 billion, they can loan out $9 or $10 or $11 billion on that. So you could see massive inflation. And I think we probably will. Right now we have this deflationary cycle, but the people who've been predicting an inflationary period and an economic downturn that's serious have been right so far. And they've mostly been laughed at. We were not too long ago when we were talking about inflation and possibly the federal government no longer being able to pay its bills and operate day to day, and that seems like a lot more of a reality than it was 6 months ago. So, I don't know when it's going to happen, but it seems like we're headed for some kind of a point where the federal government's not going to be able to continue business as usual, even if they want to.
Well, you can't borrow money forever. Eventually, even daddy runs out. And a lot of people think that the government is like Rich Daddy and he gives you free money. But you know what? The federal government, their time's going to come due as well. And so hopefully we're all prepared for it. Now, a couple weeks ago, we were talking about GM wanting a government bailout somewhere around $20-something billion, a huge sum of money. They want more now?
Well, originally the bailout was going to be for the big three automakers. It was supposed to be $25 billion total for all of them to retool their plants. Originally the idea was that they were going to retool Detroit to make energy-efficient cars. Then the price of gas came down significantly, and that doesn't seem to make much sense, which seems to point out the fact that the government is not able to react to the market in any way that makes sense. Whenever they meddle, they're just making up a solution. They're not really reacting in the way that the free market would. Well, now the big three are asking for even more. They're asking for $34 billion total now, and they have made some token gestures to try to prove that they're worthy of the taxpayers' money. Instead of flying to Washington in corporate jets to beg for taxpayer money, the big three executives are going to be driving there in hybrid automobiles from Detroit. So it's a token gesture. It doesn't really cut much of the cost for the company. Chrysler is saying it needs $7 billion by year end. General Motors wants just a quick $4 billion immediately. As kind of like a first installment. They want $18 billion total to stay afloat. They say they need it. GM's operating chief Fritz Henderson says that there is no plan B. So if they're saying that if they don't get the money, then well, as he said, absent support, frankly, the company just can't fund its operations.
Well, that's what happens when you have a poor business model, and it sucks. I mean, unfortunately, some businesses fail. Actually, a lot of businesses fail, but apparently the United States is now going to be dipping into the process of federalizing. Would this federalize these businesses, or is it just giving them free money?
It's not I mean, it's essentially socializing the losses. But the American taxpayers, maybe the government would take an ownership stake in these companies.
I think more like what they do is probably have certain mandates. The Democrats out there would want more miles per gallon or something. But essentially what it's doing is the government paying these companies because they can't operate on their own and creating a bureaucracy. Because a business can run in of itself and they make business decisions. Some of them fail, some of them don't. Governments don't at all, though. They just throw money out there, whether it's a good business or a bad business. And you don't need to be a successful business owner because their money seems to be free because they take it at the point of a gun through taxes.
Right. I mean, this money, originally it was supposed to be bridge loans, which it may still be, but essentially subsidizing zero interest or very, very low interest loans. But essentially what it amounts to is a bailout. And quite honestly, even if these companies get this money, I don't know that they're going to have enough growth to pay this money back.
In a couple of years, they'll need another $30 billion. All right, so all this bad news, Nick, I've got to throw in some good news out there because it's just all doom and gloom about the economy, this terrorism stuff. I wanted to focus in on one quick story that comes about medical marijuana from Washington. The Supreme Court has refused to review a landmark decision earlier this week on marijuana laws that now the Supreme Court in California ruled that medical marijuana states could, the police officers, local police officers, state police officers could not arrest medical marijuana patients because they had their medicine. But some police out there thought that, well, federal law says that it's illegal, so I'm going to arrest them on the federal level. The California Supreme Court ruled that that was not okay. Medical marijuana patients have rights, as do all medical patients, and the Supreme Court has upheld that decision by refusing to review the case. So that's some good news. We are no longer going to be seeing medical marijuana patients in states that it's legal be arrested and their medicine confiscated and them facing criminal action, jail time and fines and a criminal record for simply having the medicine that it is legal under state laws. So no more John Wayne police officers out there thinking that you're going to take the matter into your own hands because you like the federal government's law better than the state law.
Right, and this is really how things work during alcohol prohibition. You had a federal law under the Volstead Act and an amendment against people making or transporting or consuming alcohol. But what you didn't have in many states and cities was any kind of a local or state law against it. So state police and local police, they aren't there to enforce federal law. If there is no state law, then they're not going to be enforcing an alcohol prohibition, and it makes sense that they wouldn't enforce a marijuana prohibition. Just because the substance is different doesn't mean that things would work any differently. So in many cases, unless you had, federal liquor enforcement people, right there at your house looking for alcohol, you weren't going to get arrested for possessing alcohol in many states. It looks like we're going to see the same thing with marijuana, whether it's medical marijuana or just a general decrim bill, which we have essentially seen in Massachusetts. You're not going to see the state and local police enforcing federal laws. And thankfully for the people of California, this might save them some money.
This isn't just California. This is I think there's 13 medical marijuana states now, and all 13 are now going to be subject to this because the Supreme Court had the chance to review the decision and they've refused to, which means the Supreme Court in California, their ruling is upheld for all the other states. So this isn't just California. This will go out to all 13 medical marijuana states, and hopefully there will be more. I'm hoping that New Hampshire will be one of those, number 14, hopefully in 2009. And others following suit. So this is something that we're going to be seeing spreading out. It's going to be legal in all 50 states soon, at least for medical purposes. It is medicine. People use it as medicine. It's going to be legal. We're kind of going to look a little bit foolish in, say, 10, 20 years when we say we used to arrest people for using their medicine.
Yeah, and it's pretty foolish right now. I mean, if you actually take a look at how most drugs became illegal, it was usually because they were connected with a minority group, and people didn't like the people who tended the stereotypical user of marijuana, usually because of their skin color or some other factor. It really didn't have very much to do with any kind of facts about how harmful the drugs were. And I think right now you're going to see not just state governments, but potentially the federal government somewhat scaling back its enforcement of these laws, or maybe changing these laws, because there's just such a financial crunch right now for state governments, city governments, and federal governments. Do they really need to be enforcing marijuana laws when they can't even keep the roads paved? So they're going to have to prioritize, and I would think that this would be one of the first things to go.
Yeah, cut government where you can. All right, well, that's going to do it for us. We are out of time. I'd like to invite you to log on to our website for all the show content. It will be on the forums, as well as everything else Free Minds TV related. Join us this Sunday from 3 to 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for an all-new live episode of Free Minds Radio. For now, it's been Toby here with you.
And Nick.
Thanks a lot to Dale from anarchyinyourhead.com for directing the show, as well as Jim, Lauren's husband, filling in, helping us out here, and allowing us to continue Free Minds TV episodes. Have a great night.